Most people think early retirement is a math problem. Save enough, hit a number, and you're done. So they spend years chasing a target that keeps moving, working one more year, building one more cushion, waiting for the moment it finally feels safe enough to stop. But after nearly 30 years of helping people retire early, I've noticed something. The people who successfully retire before 62 aren't the ones who save the most. They're the ones who understood one thing about early retirement that changes the entire math, and almost nobody talks about it. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what that is, and once you see it, you'll never look at early retirement the same way again. And if you want to see what this means for your specific situation, there's a link in the description to book a call with my team or me. When it comes to early retirement, there are two important variables to understand. First, most people work longer than what they have to, and I will explain that shortly. Second, there are three important variables that cost people thousands in unnecessary taxes and health insurance costs when they retire early. So to get started, the reason many people work longer than necessary in many cases has to do with what I perceive to be a flaw with traditional retirement planning. Traditional retirement planning assumes that when you retire, you need a certain level of income in retirement, and this amount increases by an inflation rate every year to make sure that your lifestyle stays consistent throughout retirement. The problem with this approach, based on what I've seen over the last 30 years, is simple. People do not tend to increase their spending by inflation as their age increases throughout retirement. In fact, they tend to spend less. This means that many people can retire earlier than they think. Before I go through these implications, it is worth sharing additional research on this topic. The Bureau of Labor Statistics every year does something called the Consumer Expenditure Survey, which essentially shows what I just had mentioned that I've seen throughout my career in the business, that people tend to spend less as their age increases throughout retirement. In addition to that, the National Bureau of Economic Research finds older retirees are more satisfied with their financial situation than younger people on average. The implication from this research suggests that older retirees are not spending less because they don't have the money to spend. They're just spending less because they're less active in their later years, which is exactly what I've seen throughout my career. Let's take a look at how this applies to a real situation. Let's just say we have somebody that has a $2 million portfolio and they want to make their money last for 32 years, and they believe that they're going to need to withdraw $90,000 per year from their portfolio. And to err on the side of being conservative, let's just assume that they have a 6% rate of return. Now, if we assume that inflation is going to be 4% per year over the next 32 years, to err on the conservative side again, what this means is that if they were to increase their portfolio distributions every year by 4%, their money would only last 28 years and 10 months. So they wouldn't have enough money. They would deplete their nest egg before 32 years is up. If we say, well, gosh, if we just only increase our spending out of our portfolio by a 3% inflation rate per year, well, now instead of the money lasting 28 years and 10 months, their money lasts 35 years and 4 months. Now, if we even go down from there and say, well, gosh, as I age throughout retirement, I don't need to come anywhere close to keeping up with a 4% inflation rate each year with my distributions. In fact, I'd be comfortable assuming that I only need to go increase my spending from my portfolio at 2%. Well, in that circumstance, the money lasts 49 years and 1 month. So again, the inflation factors used in traditional retirement plan, in my opinion, tend to overestimate what people actually need to retire successfully. And as I just illustrated here, it can have serious implications as to when you decide to pull the trigger with your own retirement. Now, if you're looking at this, you might be thinking, yeah, this is good news, but I don't know if I'm ready yet. There are two things that I will say about this. First, the longer you work, there's no question, the better off financially that you will be. Having said that, it is very rare that I talk with one of our clients and they tell me that they wish they had worked longer. But if you are considering retiring early, there are a few things that you should know specifically about taxes and liquidity. Now, to understand what is important to know about taxes and liquidity, first, it's important to understand the three different tax buckets. And imagine for a second all of your investments had to fit into one of three buckets. The tax deferred bucket, which means your money goes in on a pre-tax or a tax deductible basis. Your money grows tax deferred while in this bucket. However, when you take money out of this bucket for retirement reasons, generally 100% of what you withdraw is subject to taxes at that time. This bucket would include things like IRAs, 401ks, 403b plans. The second bucket is what we call the tax-free bucket. The tax-free bucket would include things like Roth IRAs and Roth 401ks. With this bucket, when you put money into it, you don't get a special tax deduction up front, and your money grows tax-free, and if it comes out for qualified reasons, it comes out income tax-free. So obviously several advantages with this bucket. The last bucket is what we call the non-qualified bucket. Now with this bucket, you generally don't get any tax benefits when you put money into the investments within this bucket. And depending on the investments that you own within this bucket, that will dictate the level of taxation you have. Stocks are taxed differently than bonds, which are taxed a little bit differently than bank accounts that you might have CDs held in. So depending on the investment you own in the non-qualified bucket, that will determine how heavily that bucket is subject to tax. There are a few things to know about these buckets. If you're going to be retiring before the age of 59 and a half, you're going to have to understand your liquidity situation, because IRAs and certain retirement accounts will not allow you to withdraw money out of them before the age of 59 and a half without paying a penalty on the distribution. And there are a few ways around this. If you have a 401k or a 403b plan at work and you retire the year you turn 55, you can withdraw those monies without that penalty being incurred. Number two, if you have IRAs, you can do something called 72T distributions, which enabled you to take an annual amount out, and as long as you keep that relatively consistent and follow a few rules, you can avoid the 10% penalty by doing 72T distributions. In addition to that, if you need liquidity before the age of 59 and a half and you have a Roth IRA, the contributions you originally put into that Roth IRA can be taken out without tax or penalty. But the growth obviously has to meet a few requirements to avoid those taxes and penalties. And if you have non-qualified accounts, generally you can withdraw non-qualified accounts without any taxes or penalty prior to the age of 59 and a half. So you have to make sure that you have your liquidity set up before you retire, especially if you're going to retire at a young age. Taxes are very important, and when you retire earlier, it's a different tax dynamic than if you retire later. A few things to know: location optimization, making sure you place stocks and bonds in the right buckets. For example, generally we want to maximize long-term growth on the tax-free bucket and stifle growth on that tax-deferred bucket, because that entire bucket's going to be subject to taxes. So placing stocks and bonds strategically makes sense. In addition to that, ensuring that you own the most tax-efficient investments in the non-qualified bucket is very important. The final thing that's probably the biggest deal killer for people wanting to retire, especially before the age of 65, is what am I going to do for health insurance until Medicare kicks in at age 65? And if you're like many people, you'll go on Affordable Care Act insurance or a state-sponsored version of Affordable Care Act insurance. And this is heavily influenced by modified adjusted gross income, which is the bad news. So if your modified adjusted gross income is high, you might have to pay an exorbitant amount. Having said that, distributions from our Roth IRAs and basis from non-qualified investments, that does not count towards modified adjusted gross income. So if you have enough money in the right buckets, you can potentially dramatically reduce your health insurance costs from ACA insurance or a state-sponsored version of ACA insurance, post-retirement but pre-65 when Medicare kicks in. Now, if you're watching this and you're thinking, I want to see what this means for my specific situation, that's exactly the conversation we have every day. There's a link in the description where you can book a call with us. We'll look at your numbers together and show you what early retirement actually looks like for you. No pressure, just clarity. My sincere hope with sharing this with you is that you don't stay at a job you no longer enjoy for longer than you have to. In my opinion, traditional retirement planning gives the appearance that people have to work longer than necessary due to flawed assumptions that people spend at a similar rate throughout their entire retirement. Now that you know that the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows this isn't true, and my 30 years in the business has also illustrated how people reduce spending as age increases, and older retirees tend to even be more financially content about their financial situation than when they were younger. Now, once you understand this about early retirement, the next question becomes, can you actually retire early? I walk through exactly what that looks like for a 57-year-old with $2 million in this video right here. I'll see you there.